Have you ever felt lost, confused, or indecisive, and then suddenly a feather just appeared in your path, and instantly you just knew the answer to all of your questions? Or maybe friends and family keep buying you animal themed things, and you're wondering, why do I have like 10 pairs of frog knickers or owl cushions? And you want to understand, why is this animal turned up in my life? Or perhaps an animal has appeared to you in a dream and you're wondering, what does this symbolize? What does this mean? How can this help me with my current challenge or obstacle? This is why I have created the YouTube series Animal with myself and guests. It's going to offer you insight into what is the magic, the myth, the medicine of the animal kingdom. What does it mean to have a spirit guide that is a particular animal, and how can they support you in your life's journey, in your healing, and in your connection to self? So whether you are seeking an animal guide, or you want to understand yours better, or maybe even yourself better, or perhaps you're just curious about the symbology, the mythology, the wisdom, medicine, and magic of animals, then this is the perfect series of interviews for you. An easy and accessible way to understand the relevance of animal spirit guides to you, along with practical tips and tools for integrating the wisdom of animals into your everyday life and into your spiritual practice. Now let us fly, gallop, and dive into this episode and the support and inspiration that will empower you. Okay, so hello, welcome to this episode of Animal, the magic and myth behind our animal guides and companions. So in this episode, I'm really excited to have Steve Andrews with me. Super excited because he's going to be sharing with us all the magic of toads, and I am a big fan of toads. We were just talking about how I have toads in my garden. So Steve is an author, poet, singer-songwriter, naturalist, making sure I didn't say naturist there, although maybe also, environmental activist. And he's originally from Cardiff, where Big Issue Cymru gave him the title Bard of Ely because he was living on the Ely housing estate at the time. He's also a druid, as a quest knight of the Loyal Arthurian Warband Druid Order. So highlights of his career include Glastonbury and Green Man festivals and being featured on Britain's Got Talent. So welcome, Steve.
Well, thank you for having me here, Rachel, and thank you for that fantastic introduction, all of which is true.
Very good. I like to know there's some secrets there. Okay, so let's start off with, well, actually I have a question before we begin, just for people that are watching this. Could you tell us the difference between toads and frogs? Because I know that's always a very big question for people.
Okay, well, that's a great question, and it's actually quite simple, really. Frogs have got a smooth skin, and the toads have usually got a pimply, warty skin. They've got a rough skin. And okay, in the common toad, the male toads have maybe a little bit flatter their skin, a little bit smoother. But still they have the warts and the pimples on them. The frogs have always got smooth skin. And that's a basic. I think you can go to most parts of the world, and if you find the toad has usually got the pimples and the little spots and warts on the skin. And that's the difference between the two.
Interesting, because I know that people tend to think that frogs are smaller, aren't they, and that toads are bigger. That's something I've assumed in the past as well. Like you see the little like poison dart frogs, and then the toad in the garden is often, quite big.
Oh yeah, that's true. But there's something else that I thought, that I actually should say, that there are many toad species that they tend to like crawl or hop rather than jumping. Like, frogs they will leap, they will jump quite a long way. Toads generally don't do that. Toads are more of a crawler. And I think to some degree it's because there are many species of toads that will actually burrow into the ground. They like little holes in the ground, and they're very much, they keep close to the earth. The frogs are more of a creature that will leap about, and the frogs tend to, they have to escape from their enemies. So for them, jumping is important. They can get out of the way of, say, a cat or some other creature that's trying to catch them. With the toads, most toads have got an inbuilt defense that in the little warts that are all over their skin, they have like a toxic substance which is quite poisonous. And so if an animal, a predator animal, bites a toad, it'll get a mouthful of this stuff, and it'll certainly, make it think twice. I'm not going to bite one of those again, because it's a foul tasting, quite poisonous substance. So the toads don't need the ability to be able to leap out of the way like a frog. And I think that's got something to do with it as well.
Fascinating. And I often find that the characteristics that animals hold are those that inspire us, and also those that we can embody, which leads into my first proper question, which is, what is the magic of toads? So why would we connect to them, and how can they inspire and empower us and potentially heal us as well?
Well, I think I've got several answers to that question. What is the magic of the toad? Well, I mean, I personally think the toad looks magical anyway, with its twinkly eye. It looks wise, right? It looks as if it holds the wisdom of the ages in its eye, which I think looks like a little jewel. It's how it's there. You can see the bright eye, and something which I think, and I basically fell in love with toads as a little boy, which is when I discovered nature. And for me, something which is really magical about the toad is how the adult toads will find their way back to the spawning pool or the lake or wherever they lived as tadpoles themselves. Now, a lot of people don't realize this, and it's actually very important because the toads go back to, from where they came originally. They do this every year, and this is most important. Now, they don't understand our roads and buildings and all this rubbish that we've made. They don't get that. They think we got to go from A to B. We go from A to B. The lake or the pond we got to get to is over there, right? So we go over there. And this can be very dangerous for them, because if they cross roads, they get run over. And the good news about this is that in many places, people are having what they call toad patrols. So people will actually go out there on the road, and they will pick up the toads and move them across to safety on the other side. Now, unfortunately, there's still a lot that get killed every year. So that is not good at all. But I think what I'm really trying to illustrate there is that there is the magic of the toad knows how to get where it's going. And like a toad will travel. For example, maybe the toad has come from this pond originally as a little baby toad, it's left there. Maybe it wanders about, and maybe it even goes a mile or more away. And the toad, unlike the frog, can live in quite dry areas. So a toad could live in a sand dune. That's how dry it can get, okay? A toad can live on a heath or a moorland. So they don't mind dry areas. They can live in a wood. Whereas a frog likes the moisture. They like a marshy area or a bog or the side of a pond or a lake. And the toads are not kind of, they can travel further. They don't have to worry about whether there's water around. But because of that, they can go further. So when it comes to spawning time, which is every spring, they have like a primitive a drive, an impulse in them. We have to go now back to the ponds and lakes that we came from originally. So that's what they do. But how they do that, I don't think anybody really knows. And I always found that like something pretty magical about them. Um, Something else is like they can actually live a long time. You can get like really old toads. So when I say like a toad can look wise, they can actually have the wisdom of the years. And there's something that I'm thinking of as well, which I found kind of magical and kind of cute as well. It's a bit like, you know, how I've just told you about how they can find their spawning ponds or lakes, you know, across distance, that they know how to do that. They can also find their way home. And you will find if you have a toad in your garden, it may select an area. And I'm not saying it's going to stay there forever, but it'll certainly stay there for a while. And so every night it'll go out wandering in under the cover of darkness to find what insects and things it can catch. But then it will return to its sleeping place. Now this might be under a big stone. It might be in a flower pot that's turned on its side. It could be under, you know, some, I don't know, some undergrowth that's coming down. Wherever it is, that is the place the toad is saying, this is, I'm making this my home. And it will go back to that. So you can usually find your toad in its home, wherever you have a toad, you know, in your presence, you know. So if it's in your garden or wherever it is, it'll do that. And I think that's quite similar to how they find their way back to their spawning ponds and lakes and canals. But how they do that, well, I don't know. But you may also realize that snails can do this as well. Like if you move a snail, say off a wall, and maybe you take it to the other side of the garden and maybe even throw it out of the garden or something, the chances are that by the next night or the next day, it'll be back in the original place. They've got some kind of homing instinct as well. And I find that that's something that I have always thought was really cute and interesting about toads. And I think that's a kind of magic. And I think that's probably about, you know, the three things I could say about, you know, which are toad magic. But what am I saying? I've just thought of another. Now, the warts, the pimples on the skin of the toads contain a toxic substance. But there are some species of toad in the world which not only are the warts on their skin containing a toxic substance, but the toxic substance can actually be a hallucinatory drug. And so there are some species of toads which, unfortunately for them, humans will, you know, kind of get these toads to get the psychedelic drug effect that they can get from them. But that's a kind of magic in itself. And I'm just thinking the name of the actual chemical is bufotenine. And that comes from bufo, is like the common toad is bufo. So bufotenine is a substance that comes from the bufo creature. And bufotenine is a psychedelic hallucinogenic drug. And that's pretty magical, I think, as well.
Yeah, definitely. So they have, gosh, so much that they can contribute. Yeah, and the things that were coming through for me then was like this homing instinct about, you know, kind of always finding their way home. And I kind of always imagine them, you know, going in a car back to Toad Hall. That's how they get back. Doot, doot. And also, you know, adaptability, you know, which is, you know, something perhaps that they can lend to us, which, you know, goes into my second question, which is how can, you know, Toad help to heal and empower us, you know? So what can it What can it offer us? If we were looking to connect to them maybe as a spirit animal, how does that kind of correspond to our spiritual development or healing? Like, what can they contribute? So if they turn up as like a spirit guide or a spirit animal, what does it mean? Or why would you want to call on them?
Well, I think with the toad, one point I've already raised is that I think there is wisdom in the toad. So if we wanted, to cultivate wisdom, if we wanted, a creature that could help us with that, I think there is a lot of wisdom in the toad. And that's the one thing. And the other thing, which I've also mentioned, is that they have this homing instinct. They have this ability to find their way. And so that again, that can be like really helpful for people, to find their way. It's easy for people to get lost, The toad will show you how to get where you want to go. I think that's something else about them. And I think also determination. I think if you wanted, to think of a creature, an animal that shows determination, it is the toad. And there's one thing, which I haven't mentioned, which I'm about to mention now, is that the toad, although toads normally crawl and hop, they can also climb. So sometimes people will wonder, well, how come this toad got to wherever it is? And the answer is it climbed there. Toads will climb up a wall as long as they can grip onto something, they will climb. And this is especially important to them if they're trying to get from A to B. So if they think, I got to get from here to there, and there's whatever this is in the way, well, what can we do? Well, we can try and get over it. They are resourceful and determined, and they don't like to give up. It's the same also, when I think about that, the male toads are like this. The male toads, in the spawning season, what they've got to do, they've got to find a female. And so they will congregate, at a pond or a lake, and they do all they can to find the female. Now, unfortunately, this can be pretty heavy treatment for all the females, because if you get a whole bunch of males and you've only got one female, the males will all try to pile on that female and they will fight it out. And unfortunately, this is very sad, unfortunately, some female toads get drowned because there are too many males on them. But somehow or other, and this is a kind of magic in itself, somehow or other, there are enough toads, female toads that is, every year that manage to survive going to the pond and mating, finding a male, finding them and laying their spawn and all of that, and then leaving the pool and getting away and going to wherever they go, and then the next year coming back to repeat that. Enough of them manage to do that to keep the populations going. And there's something interesting about this as well. I think you mentioned like toads can get big. The very big toads you get, these are always female. You can guarantee that. If you find a really big toad, you can say that's a she, because the male toads, they never get anywhere near as big as the females. And in the spring, in the spawning season, you will quite often see a female toad, which is the bigger one, with a smaller male toad on her back. And quite often they arrive at the water as a couple like that, with the female carrying the male. And I think, what I just said, a bit earlier here is about the determination of the toad to get where they're going. I think that's a characteristic that they have and something that you can see in their behavior. Also, well, I'm just thinking about this and I'm thinking about determination. They're like it when they're eating. Now, a toad will eat just about anything that's small enough to go in its mouth and moving. And they will eat, well, just about anything basically that is moving and small enough to get in their mouth. And they will actually eat things which you think, well, they wouldn't eat, but they will eat bees, okay? They will eat stinging creatures. and they will get stung. I've seen this happen. I've seen a toad like catch a bee, and it goes oh like that because it gets stung on its tongue, but it manages to swallow it, and that's what's important. And the reason I'm bringing this in here is because if a toad sees some small creature moving, it won't give up. It'll try to follow the creature if it's walking along like a beetle say or a woodlouse or something, and then it will try to catch it. And then if the creature goes kind of closes up and goes quiet, like for example a woodlouse can do that, it can roll up and stop moving. The toad will wait, so it's been determined again. It'll watch, and then as soon as that woodlouse starts moving again, the toad will pounce and get it. So they're determined with catching their prey as well. And they are, you could say they're fearless as well, because they don't care if something, could sting them. They will, the job they're trying to do is to catch something and swallow it down, and that's it. So if you're a stinging creature, well, tough, I will still eat you. That's the attitude of the toad. The toad does what it's got to do, and it sticks with it. So I think determination is a characteristic that they definitely embody.
Yeah, I love that. So fearless and determined, and they can help inspire that in us. And also, I do like the fact that they validate the fact that I can eat everything and anything and be a little bit larger and curvy as a woman. I'm allowed to be big.
Well, yeah. I mean, the female toads. That's the other thing. Not only are they bigger, they also get plumper, and that's the way you can actually recognize them. If you find like a plump and big toad, then you can say that's a she, because the males they're slimmer and they're smaller and they have smoother skin, like I said. But the thing is that the females they have to carry all the spawn, and this is most important because like a female toad, she can lay a couple of thousand, okay? One toad, she can lay a couple of thousand like eggs as spawn, toad spawn, and those all become tadpoles. And then you can say like quite a lot of those then become little toadlets. But how many make it up to being adult, that's a different matter. But there are so many produced by each female toad that it guarantees that there's always like a new generation of toads coming about. And I think that's something pretty amazing as well. And I know like when I was a boy, well, still, with toads, the toad tadpoles, certainly the common toad, not all species, but certainly the common toad, they tend to hang out together. So if you go to a pond and you see a vast quantity of tadpoles, all in one area, like wiggling their little tails, those are most likely to be toads because the frog tadpole is more of a solitary creature. You will see maybe like one frog tadpole there, maybe one there and one there, but you won't see a whole mass of them. With the toad tadpoles, you will, and they will like swim about, in a group, and they will, if they find something they can feed on, they will all kind of congregate on that, and you see like a whole load of them. And there's another difference as well, that the toad tadpoles tend to be a much darker color. They look almost black. They look like the color of my hat, for example. If you saw a tadpole this color, that's a toad tadpole. The frog tadpoles, they get a bit bigger, and they're more of an olive brown color, and they've got little speckles on their skin. So they look different and their behavior is different.
Well, they definitely have my sympathies. Like, they have thousands of children. You imagine bedtime, like, come on, go. Oh gosh. But yeah, no, that's fascinating. I did not know that about tadpoles. So that really is helpful actually. So when I see them out in the wild, I'll know what I'm actually looking at, and I can
Yeah,
say
sure.
hello appropriately.
If you see a whole lot of tadpoles with, this kind of color,
Yeah.
and you see them all in a group, those are going to be the toad tadpoles.
Wow. Oh, I didn't realize that. Oh, thank you for sharing that. That's fascinating. So what impact have they had on your life? What do they mean to you? What kind of magic has Toad created like for you? Have they been your guides and your inspiration, or maybe even brought you healing?
Well, I can't really answer with anything, that goes into into the guides kind of area, but I can give you a story, a true story of a toad, which was definitely magical. And I mean, I'm 72 now, and this would have been probably when I was about 7 or 8, something like that. So it was long ago, but I can remember this toad because it was so magical, I think would be the word. This is the story. Like when I was a boy, I was in love with nature. I think, you already have gathered that. And in the back garden, I used to have, well, I used to keep a variety of creatures. I used to keep caterpillars, and I used to keep field voles, and I used to keep various freshwater fish, sticklebacks and elvers, and I used to keep newts, and I used to keep common lizards and slowworms and grass snakes and all kinds of creatures that I used to keep. And they were my life, So like when I came home from school, it was not only homework, it was go and attend to my menagerie of creatures. Now, I was lucky because my parents encouraged, my interest, my hobby. And my father gave me a garden frame. Now, when I say garden frame, it was intended for growing plants. But this one, it had like glass sides, okay? It had a glass roof that you could slide up and down. And it was quite big. It was maybe about 6 foot long and maybe about 4 or 5 foot, the other way. And it was fine for keeping some small creatures in. Now, right by it, maybe about 2 foot away, there were 2 old-fashioned sinks which had been sunk in the ground, which made little ponds. They had fresh water in them and pondweed and stuff, and there were actually toads that came because they were tadpoles, and so there were toads which came back to these, under the principle I was explaining earlier, coming back to these particular sinks, which for me was exciting because every spring, I'd see the toads arrive back, and also there were newts that did that. But what I'm thinking of, what I wanted to tell you about is this one magical toad, and this was amazing. Right, in the garden frame, as I'm saying, I kept various creatures in there. I kept toads in there. I kept frogs in there. I kept newts in there. I kept slowworms in there. And all these creatures were all fine. I used to put some turfs of grass in there, and there was a little water dish thing, so they had water, and there was a lot of soil in there, earth, and I put rocks in there and bits of wood and all this. So it was like a natural environment, but it was enclosed, so they couldn't get out. Now, the toad that I'm thinking of was deformed. Whether he was born deformed, I don't know, but whatever had caused this, he only had 3 legs. So he had 2 back legs and he had 1 front leg, and the other front leg was missing. Now, for a start, I used to wonder, well, how does he manage to get about? And he didn't used to get about well because if he would try to launch himself forward, because he's only got the one hand to prop him, he'd go like that, and he'd bang his chin on the floor. But then again, this was like I was talking about determination in the toad. He was undaunted by that. He said, well, okay, I went like that, but never mind, So this toad, I put him in the garden frame, thinking, okay, that'll be a safe place for him in there. I can look after this toad. And he's only got the 3 legs. So I'm thinking that this is a toad that can't climb. I've been talking about toads can climb, toads can travel, toads can do all this. He couldn't. He's only got the 3 legs. But then something most mysterious started happening. Like I would close the frame with the slide down glass top, and all the other creatures were in that frame, and they couldn't get out of the frame because it's sealed, it's glass sides and glass sliding top. But the one day I'm looking in there, I couldn't find the three-legged toad. So, well, where is the three-legged toad? This is crazy. Of all the creatures in here, he is the one with the least chance of getting out of it. Now, a while later, I'm moving the big rocks that are around the sinks that are embedded in the ground with the water in, and under one of them was the three-legged toad. So I thought, oh, there he is, wow. How did you get here? Well, doesn't matter, you got here somehow, I don't know how, but I'll put you back in the garden frame. I put him back in the garden frame, and it happened again the next night. And this kept happening. And eventually, I thought, well, I don't understand it. It was as if he had some ability to materialize and dematerialize. He could dematerialize himself inside the garden frame, rematerialize himself on the other side, and then go where he wanted, which was to go under a stone by the little, the sink that was in the ground. So that was about the only kind of thing that I could think up. It didn't make that much sense. You really had to believe that things like that could happen. But I couldn't think of anything else because he couldn't climb. He certainly wouldn't, I mean, there wasn't any way out anyway. There were no cracks, there was nothing. So how could he do this? And so I got used to this, and this went on. It's like, it would be like every day, basically. You know, I go to the stone, I lift the, there he is again, okay, I'm putting you back in, I put him back. And it never worked, always he got out. And then finally, there was the day he'd gone missing from the garden frame. I went to the stone thinking he could be under the stone. No, he wasn't there. And I never saw him again. So this leaves various questions. Like the obvious question was, how was he escaping from the frame? How did he do this? I don't know, and I never found out. And the other question is, where did he go when he went? And the other question was, which I haven't asked, is how did he eat? And the reason I ask that is because with a toad, what they normally do is they use both their hands to push their food in their mouth. I don't know if you've ever seen one, but this is what they do. They go kind of like that with their tongue and their mouth, and they grab, and then they go like that and hit whatever they've caught into their mouth. Now I thought, well, the three-legged toad, there's no way he can do that. When he's trying to grab something in his mouth, he's going to go like that and hit his chin on the ground, which I've seen him do if he tries to move. And then if he did manage to catch something, he's only got the one hand, so he'd have to go kind of like that, and he's going to bang his chin again on the ground again. He'd probably lose anything that he has caught. So I never managed to figure this out. And this was most frustrating, okay, because the toads that I kept, which were like pets, okay, they got used to me. So we could pick them up and put them on your hand, and that was fine, and they weren't scared. And you could put a toad down on a flat surface, and I could put something in front of it, like a worm, for example. And then the toad would see the worm moving, and then the toad would eat it, and that was it. But with the three-legged toad, I used to try this. I used to think, okay, well, let's find out how this three-legged toad actually eats. Let's put him on a flat surface here, on a path or something. Let's put something moving in front of him. I do that, but he never showed any interest at all. It was just like, I'm sat here, I'm the three-legged toad, that's moving there, well, I don't care, I'm not doing anything. And I could try doing that for a while and still nothing would happen. So I never found out how he ate. I never found out how he got out of the frame. And I never found out where he went when he finally vanished. And I think that definitely qualifies him as a magical toad.
I think he must be like some kind of wizard that he went off to do yoga so he could use his back legs to eat. That's that's my theory. I think you were saying before, weren't you, about how they can burrow as well? Can they dig down into the earth? You were saying they can create tunnels, was it? They go into burrows, I think.
They can follow, did you say? Can they?
Like, yeah, burrow, like dig
Oh,
down into the earth. You were saying
burrow,
before they can go
burrow,
into,
burrow. Yeah, yeah. Yes,
yeah,
they can burrow in the earth,
yeah,
and they do this. Like uh, toads actually quite like living in a hole.
yeah,
So if it was, say, like a mouse's hole or something, and they found that, a toad could quite happily move itself into that as its home. Of course, that could be a problem, because if the mouse was still living there, or some other small creature, a vole or a shrew or whatever, then it wouldn't work. But if a toad can find an unoccupied small mammal hole, that would be like fine for a place for it to live. But failing that, they will dig.
yeah.
In fact, you can do this as a kind of experiment. If you happen to have like a toad and you put it down, if you had a toad and you put it down on some earth, like, crumbly earth, quite soft earth, the toad will dig itself in. It'll do this kind of, makes motion with its body and its legs, and it digs itself down. And I used to find, well, this is maybe quite important, certainly quite important for me. When I was a boy, my dad, who, as I say, my dad and my mum, they used to encourage my love for nature. We used to go to a place called Kenfig, which is in Wales, South Wales. The Kenfig Dunes, it's on the South Welsh coast. And it's basically sand dunes, and also there's a big lake there. Now the lake is where the toads go. So every spring I would see hundreds and hundreds of toads there. And they would be crawling across the sand dunes, and in the water you'd see them. But the reason I'm talking about Kenfig is because it was sand. Sometimes you would find a toad kind of dug into the wall of a sand dune, into the sand. And also I mentioned, I think earlier, that toads can live in a dry area. Well, this is an example of it.
Yeah.
It's sand. So there used to be a lot of toads there, and you were asking about them burrowing, and yes, indeed, like in sand they will bury, and they will burrow down. And it's a really good way of hiding, It's like, I was talking earlier about how a frog will leap. It will leap out the way if it feels attacked, The toad doesn't need to bother with all that. The toad can just dig itself into the sand or the earth, or hide down the hole. And there's something else which is coming to mind about this, is that the toad with its warty skin, it looks more like earth. Like, in fact, I don't know if you've seen like a toad with a kind of a brownish color, maybe, and it, to the degree that unless it moves, you may not even notice it. I don't know if you've ever seen a toad like that, but they can look almost like the earth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
like
so,
camouflage.
yeah, the camouflage is exactly what I'm getting at. That they have that camouflage. They have that warty skin that looks like the earth. And if they stay still, which they do a lot, they stay still also for hunting, their food, because if they stay still, they're not going to scare anything away. If something comes along, great, that they can catch it. So they spend a lot of their time quiet. And if a toad stays quiet, settled down into a little patch of earth, the chances are nothing's going to see it. Whereas the frog is far more of an agile creature. The frog likes to move about, and the frog, it doesn't do that. It won't kind of bury itself down into the ground. The frog is usually up there, and the slightest movement, frog sees somebody coming, oh, okay, the frog leaps out of the way. So that they've got very different nature, like the frog and the toad, I think. And like I say, the toad has got that camouflage with the skin that looks like earth.
Yeah, yeah, that's fascinating. Yeah, really interesting. Oh, I can see how they'd be such, yeah, powerful inspiration. Definitely, definitely. For us, like connecting to our own instinct as well. Like if we feel like we're in danger or we're fear, they would help us to ground back into our bodies. That we have that fight or flight. Actually coming back and centering and grounding and enabling us to kind of like be the wise toad that's thinking, okay, what's the reality right now, and how can I protect myself in a way that's healthy, protect myself in a way that I'm coming back into my power. Yeah, I can see how they'd definitely inspire that. So to kind of bring this to a conclusion, what tips or kind of tools would you give, to somebody if they wanted to connect to Toad themselves now? So if they're watching this and they're thinking, oh, I'd really love to support Toad or, connect to them myself, what can they do?
Well, there are various things that people can do to help the toads. The one I mentioned earlier is if you happen to be lucky enough to live in an area where toads live and where you have roads that the toads, and that rhymes, where you have roads that the toads have to cross, you could join a local toad patrol if there are any in your area, or maybe you could start one to try and help move the toads across the road. And generally this would be in March, maybe April, depending on where you are in the country. That's something that definitely helps the toads. And the other thing is that, well, this applies to any amphibian. And not just amphibians, other like aquatic life could be dragonflies, could be water beetles, water snails. And if you've got a garden and you have like a garden pond, like a wildlife pond, and I say wildlife pond because unfortunately, wonderful as they are, goldfish and many wildlife don't get on too well because like if you have a pond with goldfish in, and say you have frogs, and the frogs spawn in that pond, and you've got the little tadpoles hatch out, the goldfish can eat the tadpoles, and the goldfish could eat baby newts. And so the thing is, it's best to have like a wildlife pond without any fish in it, because the fish are probably going to be like a problem with eating, the babies and the other things. But if you can't manage that, still some of the tadpoles will probably survive. So a pond is just a really good thing to have. Now, with toads, it could take a while. Like say you decide, okay, I'm going to have a pond in my garden and put that there today, and think, well, okay, next spring, am I going to get any toads turning up? Maybe not, because the toads, it can take a long time because they usually go where their usual breeding place. Yeah. Now, I did find out years ago that if they lose their natural breeding place, say, which does happen, say, there can be a pond somewhere, and then one day somebody decides they're going to build a house there or drive a road or whatever. When the amphibians turn up in the spring, their place that they're aiming for is gone. What they do is they wander about, and if they find somewhere else, they will use it. I saw that happen in Cardiff. I remember there were ponds on a riverbank which were flattened. They were making like a pathway there. And so I was horrified. I thought, oh no, where will the toads go now? Where they went was over a mile away, where there was a canal, a feeder canal, and that year, for the first time ever, there were toad tadpoles in there. So I figured out what had happened. They'd gone wandering about and they'd found that. So they can do that. And if they do that, if you've got a pond in your garden, they might well find it. And then it starts the whole thing. So that's something you can do, definitely. The other thing you can do is you can join an amphibian conservation protection society. Now, I've got my Save the Frogs t-shirt on here, and this is a Save the Squeaker frog, which is actually an African frog, but never mind. Save the Frogs basically have branches of this amphibian conservation society all over the planet, and we don't only save frogs, we save toads and salamanders and newts and any amphibians. All the amphibians need our help. So you could join Save the Frogs. If you Google it, Save the Frogs, you will easily find Save the Frogs. But there are others as well. I'm thinking there's one Frog Life, and there are probably many more. And also like local conservation societies. Most places have got some kind of a naturalist group or conservation society, and these people usually know about, the plight of the local amphibians and where the ponds or the wetlands or whatever you've got there are, and what can be done. So that's something else, to join in with a local group, join a society, an organization, put a pond in your garden, and any and all of those basically are all good for helping the toads. And also, spread the magic, which actually you're doing, Rachel. Spread the magic of the toad by telling people about them. And I think that's important, because a lot of people actually don't know what we have and what is out there and what's about. So I think you're doing like a wonderful job in doing this, in spreading some toad magic. And one more thing I think I ought to mention is that in the UK, besides the common toad, which isn't as common as it used to be, there's the natterjack toad, and the natterjack toad is a rare toad. The natterjack toad is, well, I'm 72, like I said, and the natterjack toad was rare when I was a boy. The natterjack toad, it likes to live in sandy areas. So like a sand dunes, there aren't any at Kenfig, the place I was talking about, but there are other sand dunes where the natterjack toad holds its own. The reason they like sandy areas is because they like kind of temporary pools of water. This is important. So like in the spring, if you get a lot of rain, you can get like a temporary pool forming, and the natterjack toads, they will congregate there. The males croak, they call the females in, they spawn, and because it's temporary, even this has an advantage. It's temporary, which means that other creatures, for example, fish, there's going to be no fish there because they can't survive, because it's going to dry up. So that gives them an advantage, and the tadpoles will go through their changes into the little toads and then go wherever they go in the local sandy area. And I just wanted to mention them because that's like a rare toad that lives in the UK. Yeah. And the one thing which just occurred to me then, but I missed out completely. I remember, like, you asked me at the beginning of this talk about the magic of toads, and I gave you some examples, all good examples. But the one thing I neglected to mention was the transformation of the toad. That the toad goes from the little black dot, the little egg in the jelly in the toad spawn. It becomes the tadpole, the little swimming tadpole with a little tail. It grows legs, 4 legs, 2 legs at the back and 2 legs at the front, little hands. Its tail starts to get less and less and disappears, and eventually it's a miniature toad. So it is transformed completely from an egg to a tadpole to a toadlet, and all of that has happened by magic or by natural magic. And it's just like the caterpillar. The caterpillar, the butterfly or the moth lays the egg, it becomes the egg, it becomes the caterpillar, becomes the chrysalis and or the cocoon, the pupa and the cocoon, and then it becomes the amazing winged, the butterfly or the moth. Transformation. And the one thing that I've seen all my life is that transformative process in nature, that we see the one thing go to another thing, to another thing, to another thing. That's its life cycle. And I think that's definitely very real magic.
Yeah, it's something that we can really relate to, as our own journey, that same transformation, as we grow into ourselves, we kind of have a glimpse of who we are when we're younger, and then over the years we become more and more kind of, have more clarity around who we are and who we're meant to be, don't we? Definitely. Yeah, there's some really good tips. I actually have some natterjack toads by me on the
Have
North Wales
you?
coast. Yeah, they've got like one little
Wow.
like pondy area right on the coast,
Wow.
and they have like natterjack parties where like people go and like protect the area, make sure that they're still there and count them and things. I'm gonna have to go and join one now.
This is fantastic, Rachel. There you are. See, I was talking about that, and you actually have this going on, where you are, and you know
Yeah,
about the
it's
nanny.
fantastic, isn't it? And
That's
it's it's
amazing.
really good to connect to and support the wildlife that is around you, especially, I think. And like you said, I think is a really good tip to encourage people to have a pond in their garden, even if it is
Mhm.
just something like an old sink, like you said, because it makes such a big difference to the microcosm, of and supporting wildlife, that, from birds, to the insects, not just the amphibians, but everybody. And it's also a good place for us to go to have a point of connection for ourselves in the garden. Like being near water is really relaxing. So you could even, if you want to connect to toad on a on a spiritual level, you could even go meditate, by the pond, and hopefully they'll be croaking in the background to give you some meditative music.
Oh, totally, totally. That's the connecting with the natural magic where you are, and I think that is something really important. I think that because people ask me, like, as an activist, what can you do? And the one thing that I always say is that it's almost a cliche, but like, to think globally but act locally. And I think but it's so important that if we do what we can where we are, that's the way. And I can relate that to indigenous peoples, tribal peoples. I talk about them as well. It's like indigenous people and the tribal people will know how to live where they are. And I think, I'm sure you know what I mean by that. They know what foods they can eat where they are. They know how to protect themselves from the weather where they are, if it's too hot or too cold or whatever it is. So they have all of that worked out ideally for where they are.
Yeah.
And that's, again, that's an example of acting locally. All indigenous people act locally where they are, in balance with the conditions where they are. And I think that that's really, in a way, a kind of a recipe for life all over the planet. If we can think locally about what we've got where we are, and if we look after where we are, if everybody all around the planet all look after where they are, we've got an absolutely wonderful healed world. Yeah. The problem is we've got all this division and moving about and do this and take that from there and take that. That's not it. It's the attention to nature, the magic of nature, and the whole way that nature works where you are. And having a little pool, like you said, that's a wonderful place as a focus. You can focus in on it, like you said, you could meditate there. And like, we both know, and I mentioned, it's not even just for the amphibians. Other things like dragonflies are going to turn up there. And it's quite amazing. You think, well, you can have like something like you put a sink of water in, and then just a dragonfly will just appear, or a damselfly, like the smaller, the finer versions of the dragonflies, and they find it somehow, And I always think about that all these creatures, they're out there looking for what they need. Like the amphibians are looking for water, and the dragonflies are looking for water, and the water beetles are looking for water, and they're flying about looking for the water. And then there's other creatures, like really fascinating, like the pond skater. The pond skater is flying about looking for water. So if you put that little bit of water there in your garden, you're going to be doing a big favor to all these creatures I just mentioned, and you're going to see them find that water. And it's your like little contribution on a local level where you are.
Yeah.
And that I think is the way.
Yeah, definitely. You know, my next door neighbour has a pond in her garden, and often I look out the window and I'll see her dog like sat in the middle of it, like completely blissed out, and he looks like he's in a jacuzzi. So even big animals can benefit. But yeah, no, that's fantastic. So for those that are watching, you know, you can make a difference. You know, even the small things really do impact the whole. You can do something to support, and I will pop some links down below for the things that, you know, Steve has mentioned, like Save the Frogs, so you've got a quick and easy link to go and look at them. I'll also pop the links down below for Steve himself, so you can go and find out more about him. And you know, check out his books as well. His Moss and Butterfly books is one of my favorites. I do enjoy it. So yeah, do go check that out. And thank you so much, Steve, for being a guest and sharing so much about the magic of toads and frogs, actually.
Well, thank you so much, Rachel.
Oh, you're welcome. And yeah, we'll see you all in the next episode. So take care and